I just wanted to introduce myself. I think almost everyone here in the room knows me, or I've met you guys, but I'm Kevin Dunne. I run business development and strategy here at QASymphony. I've been here for almost 3 years, which is incredible. I mean, I think if we brought every user in the platform that we had at the time when I started, we still wouldn't have as many people as we have in the room here today. So pretty amazing. One of the earliest customers we had actually was Better Cloud before Adam joined there. So we've been working with Better Cloud since 2013. And so what we're here to talk to you guys today about is pretty interesting, and it's something that actually Adam's taught me a lot about. So this is basically BDD, TDD, and ATDD, which is behavior-driven development, test-driven development, and acceptance test-driven development. And so we'll talk about a few different things here. This is one of Adam's quotes. I can't take credit for this, but Adam's a big martial arts guy and big Bruce Lee fan. And so the point of the presentation in this quote is really that, you know, we're talking about new stuff here, and I know to a lot of you guys, you might just be getting started with testing. So we're talking about one of the sort of next generation techniques in testing, which is this test-driven development. And so really take, you know, the concepts that you can use out of this and apply them in your everyday organization. And this is not meant to be a dogmatic type of presentation to tell you guys, hey, there's only one way to do testing and it's this brand new thing. We know that, you know, a lot of you guys, for whatever reasons, might not want to or might not be able to do all of this stuff today. So it's really the thought behind it, and to show you guys something new, leave you guys at the end of the day here with something you can think about as you go back in your organizations and start working towards Quality Jam for next year. We hope to talk to a lot of you guys next year who might be implementing some of these things for the first time. And so this is the agenda today. I'm going to get out of the way for a while and let Adam really give you guys the intro. Again, it's really exciting to see Adam has become a thought leader as he's been a Q-Test customer. So I do want to give that plug. You know, any of you guys that are interested in talking about this type of testing stuff, we're trying to really continue to be thought leaders in the testing space. And, you know, Adam has done a number of conferences with us, spoken at a number of things like this. So next year, if any of you guys want to get up on stage and talk about this stuff, let me know, let some of us know, and we'd be happy to get you up here and give you a plug. But this is the agenda we've got today. So we'll talk a little bit about the real world software development and testing challenges. So that's why I'm going to let Adam really speak to that as, you know, somebody who's been in QA for many years and really seen the process firsthand. He'll talk about that and introduce some of these test-first methodologies, help you understand what they are. And then I'll come back in, talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you have in adopting these methodologies. And we'll talk about a really neat survey we did. A lot of you guys in the room answered that survey. About 200 people responded to that. And so we're one of the first people to do a survey about these test-first methodologies. So we'll give you kind of a real-time look at how people are using these today in industry. And then I'm going to switch back, bring Adam back up on stage to wrap it up, and he's going to actually run through and show you guys the real details of how they run this process at Better Cloud. It's really cool. They're right down the street from us, so I've been to their office a number of times and seen how they run this thing, and it's really neat. So we're looking forward to seeing him talk about that. And obviously we'll wrap up with Q&A. So I'm going to pass it over to Adam. Again, Adam's the VP of QA at Better Cloud, which is right down the street from here. Really neat company, and he's going to get going for us.
Cool. Thanks, Kevin. Hey, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Right on. All right, so first we're going to go over some of the current or common problems that people have in software development. And we're going to start with waterfall. So one of the big things with waterfall is the separation of QA from the customer and the length of time it takes to get requirements or the customer ask out the door, get it tested, get it developed. As you can see here with the chart that we have, is there is a lot of work that goes in up front before testing is ever even thought about. So the product team talks to the customer, some requirements are done, some analysis, maybe QA starts getting involved in a little bit, but really QA does not get involved until the very, very end. A lot of what this causes as well is it causes a big disconnect between what the customers really want and what is actually delivered and what is actually tested. So I'm sure that a few of you have been in the scenario where you get the requirements, they've been worked on for 6 months, maybe a year, and they're not quite what the customer wanted, but you go ahead and you start writing your test cases on them because it was the requirements given to you, so you assume that that's what the customer wanted. So you start working on them, and then you're given another draft after you started your test cases, after you've already maybe even done writing your test cases with some updates, if that draft ever gets to you. So you do your work, everything's developed, you release your code, feedback from the customer, you start getting defects in of this isn't what I wanted, this isn't how it's supposed to work, and then the cycle starts all over again, but nobody really goes back to actually address the issue of communication, of getting testers moved to more of the front of the process. So waterfall is not the only area where we have issues with QA and issues with making sure that we get the proper product developed and out into production. So how can QA break down in Agile itself? So one of the big things that I've seen going from company to company, working with a few folks, is that QA is constantly kept out of the loop. So you'll have the product team will meet with the architects, they'll meet with some of the developers, and they'll create user stories. And those user stories have estimates put on them. And then we'll get into sprint planning, and they'll say, okay, well, it's 5 story points, and we'll go ahead and work on it. And okay, well, maybe we'll tack on an hour or 2 for QA, but that really doesn't matter because we have to get the story done. And the story, to them, done is developed. It's not tested. It's not developed and tested and ready to go. So yeah, QA is kept out of the loop. Another thing that I oftentimes see is QA doesn't get a chance to write, much less complete their acceptance test until the sprint starts. So it immediately puts QA behind the curve. So they're trying to catch up, they're trying to test the work coming in. Agile is supposed to be very iterative, supposed to be getting functionality very quickly. So they're getting the functionality, they're writing their tests at the same time, they're trying to figure out what's going on, they're learning the product, and they're completely overworked. And the key problem with this is QA doesn't get a chance to write truly complex, proper test scenarios because of this. Another problem that we have is dev and QA are out of sync. So QA is not involved in the sprint planning meetings, so therefore they are essentially just handed work. It's not a true communication. It is dev, here you go, here's your work, QA, go ahead, kick it off, you're good to go. And also there's a big problem of lack of understanding to qualify when QA is actually truly done. It's a big thing in QA. Folks are always trying to figure out, how do you define done? When am I done with my testing? What am I testing against? How do I, again, qualify, that I have, completed everything I need to complete for my testing? So with those problems, you're probably wondering, okay, well, why do we have waterfall? Why do we have just Agile? Why don't we do something better? Well, these methodologies were come up with a while back when things weren't as easy as they are today. So, and some people may even be experiencing some of these right now. So I come from a very large enterprise semiconductor company where if we wanted to have an environment created, it took on average about a month and a half. So, we have to go out, we'd have to get the server specs, we'd have to figure out what kind of drives we want to run. And then when we get that, it was up to the QA team to load the proper OS, to make sure we get the right patches on, any browsers that we need to get, any drivers that we need to get. It was very difficult. Code merges. It was always a risky proposition. Devs really didn't like to do a lot of code merges because there weren't a lot of really good tools to handle that. And lack of collaboration is another big one as well. Nowadays, we've got Slack and all sorts of really cool tools, but really, back in the day it was, okay, I need to get a draft of the requirements. Well, hopefully, please let the BA have put that on the server where I can go and grab it. Okay, it's not on the server, let's go ask for the draft. They email me the draft. 30 minutes later, it's out of date, right? So really not many good cloud options there. So what's changed to help our situation, and what then can we do to change some of our ways to work with this? So for environment creation, containers, virtualization, we've got so many more better ways to have environments created faster. We can simulate browsers, we can simulate mobile devices. There's so many better things that we can do now to keep the pace moving for QA. We're moving away from desktop focus only testing. So now we have the ability to test in web and mobile. And as you guys know, mobile architecture, mobile development moves very, very quickly compared to desktop. Things are always constantly changing. And if we take the same long-term waterfall approach where we don't have much communication between dev and QA, we're going to have problems in that fast-paced world. And then, for lack of collaboration, so what we're seeing now is an increase in tools. We have the ability, we have Skype for Business. We've got the ability to do screen shares. We've got Google Drive. We have the ability to share docs, work on docs at the same time to get real-time updates as people are building in requirements. Of course, we've got Jira and Qtest, so we've got all these abilities, whether they're in the cloud or on-prem, to work together on the same project. So, things are changing in the world. How can we as QA change? So taking a look at the traditional approach that we talked about a little bit earlier is essentially what would happen is requirements would come in, they'd work on them with the developers, they'd start doing some of their coding, they'd just start cranking out code as per the requirements. At that point, typically when the coding is done, QA gets in, they start doing their testing, they're learning the product, they're learning the requirements, they're trying to do the testing at the same time, all while trying to march towards that deployment date, which is getting closer and closer. So what we can do to change that is approach with a test-first mentality. So think, okay, we're not going to think, okay, we're going to code. No, we're going to test first. We're going to write our tests first, we're going to get our test out there, and then we're going to start doing our coding. And we're going to take QA, which has typically been at the very end of the process, and move them to the very beginning of the process. So as we're talking today, Kevin had mentioned with my hero, Bruce Lee, you'll hear folks interchange some terms between test-driven development, BDD, ATDD. There are some interchangeable terms. You'll hear some folks call acceptance tests, acceptance criteria. There is some interchangeability. So again, one of the things I like to ask my team whenever we meet is, at the end of the meeting, I'll ask them, okay, what value did you get out of this meeting? What did you learn? What were some of the key concepts that you learned that you can take away with you? So one of the things I want you guys to take a look at is take a look at something that you can go away from here and apply to your organization, right? So if you go to your organization and you guys call your acceptance criteria acceptance test, and you go only as far as the acceptance criteria, that's great. If you're increasing communication and you guys are getting the job done, better after you leave here, then that's good. There's no reason to spend time quibbling over acceptance test should be called acceptance criteria. It really, honestly, doesn't matter in the end. And so, as we look at this, you'll see a lot of concepts shared amongst these various things. So if you get confused, come and talk to Kevin or I. Happy to talk to you about it, but it definitely, there's a lot of shared concepts between these. Cool. So again, building on that here, one of the things I want to focus on is a great quote here. I love this. Kevin has shared this with me. The key takeaway here is collaboration and learning, right? So some of the key concepts of Agile: communication, collaboration, learning. Things to always keep in mind that if what you're trying to do in an Agile type environment is not focused around communication and collaboration, there's probably something wrong with the process or procedure that you're using. Always, always, always focus on communication and collaboration. So again, there's not always the sunny side of things. There are some cons to using ATDD or BDD. There is additional time that is needed. If you're going to be writing your test up front, you're going to have to bake more time for your QAs to spend more time writing their tests. Typically, at Better Cloud, I'll go over this later, but typically what we'll do is we'll spend 6 hours a day of core working time and 2 hours a day-ish. Would be great to only work 8 hours a day, but 2 hours a day planning the next sprint, right? So it's going to take more time to start writing those tests up front. Your QAs will have to become stronger participants. Some of them you may have to drag into there. Some of them are going to love it. They're going to love being able to step up and truly become the SMEs, but they will have to be stronger contributors. No longer are they going to be the end of the process. They're going to have to step up and talk to the BAs or talk to the product owners and talk to the devs and have conversations and say, have we thought about this? Why aren't we testing at this? If the user's using it like this, why aren't we thinking about it like that? They're going to have to step up. And definitely increases the automation needs in an organization. As Keith said, typically it gets a little bit more expensive, right, as you go through. So automation is going to become more and more important the faster we go and the better our tests get and the more involved QA is going to be. So let's go over some key concepts as we go through this of BDD or ATDD. So user stories. I think a lot of us are very familiar with user stories, but this is where we start, right? This is the what. This is how the business conveys their ask to us. At Better Cloud, we use the as a, I want to, so that. It's a great format for us. It allows us to see, okay, who is the business owner, who is the user that is being impacted, and we can see the business reasons. So a lot of times I see people leave out the so that. It's like, well, I really don't know why it's important, or the business ask doesn't really matter. And it's like, well, it does matter because that gives the QA team color and understanding of what the business truly needs. This is very, very important. In fact, we've seen some folks actually experimenting with putting the so that before the I want to. So essentially, they have to define the business request, the business need for this ask. From there comes the acceptance criteria. So it is truly how we define done. Without the acceptance criteria, the user story, it's not enough information. We can't test against just the user story. We have to get some more meat and potatoes. We have to truly understand what is the true system behavior. There has to be information so that way we can figure out, does the feature truly work as it's expected, as well as it'll guide development in the QA testing. You'll see in some of the next slides how we're going to be using that for both our manual and automation. So examples based on the user story that we had before. So, some of the things that we're talking about here is, what is the user going to see as they're interacting with the software? What is going to happen with the actual system when the user goes through and, okay, so I need to update my billing information. Okay, what's going to happen there? What, why? Those types of questions are the questions that they're going to be asking to get to the root of the acceptance criteria. So the acceptance test, this is truly the heart of BDD. This gets us to this given, when, then magic formula. This was a big breakthrough for us at Better Cloud using this. Typically, we were going from user stories to acceptance criteria to then step 1, step 2, step 3 in a test case, and we were testing very much in a silo. We weren't giving the test team enough creativity, enough ability to get in and truly test it as a user would be using it. So this might be new to a lot of folks, but this is definitely the meat and potatoes, as it were, of BDD. So given, so this is going to set the stage. This is what the system is before the user starts testing, prior to testing. So we have when. So this is the actions that the user is performing on the system. Sometimes you'll see folks have when and, totally fine. That's just where the user may perform a couple of actions to get to the actual reaction of the system under test, as we call it. And then we have then, so that is the system's reaction to the action being performed. So example based on the acceptance criteria that we had. So given the user is navigated to the billing page, when the user clicks on update billing, then the customer is presented with a form to enter a new address. It's very simple. Anyone can take a look at it. One of the things that we had found before was the BAs and the product team, they hated going and looking at a test case that had 50, 100 steps. They said they lost themselves in that. And when we transitioned from that to the BDD form, is they're like, oh, okay, well that makes sense. But actually the user shouldn't see that pop-up. They should see something else, right? So it allowed them to get more interactive with the QA team to start really finding, the issues in the testing, or maybe the business ask that they actually truly wanted needed to be modified. Kevin?
So now the benefits that you guys will see in a test-first approach. So we've worked with a number of customers who have implemented this type of process, and obviously it's like when you guys brought in Q-Test, right? I mean, you had to make the business case of, well, we're going to pay for this system and we're going to train people on it and take time to implement it and migrate our data, and what's the benefit, right? Why would we spend time doing that? And I think people overlook that a lot, honestly, in the testing community. As testers, we just kind of do things, and we're always trying to get stuff done, but not thinking about the big picture, right? So this is to take it up a little bit and talk about, all this stuff is great, but why are we doing it, right? So the biggest thing I think that this test-first approach does is really moves testing up front. So obviously quality is important to everyone here. That's why we're in the room, right? And so moving testing up front means that you are guaranteeing that there'll be time to do testing. So typically, if testing's at the end of the cycle, what we're going to do is, well, we're kind of in this state where we have a feature that's ready to go out the door, but we might not have time to test it thoroughly. And so then we're incentivized to maybe do less testing so that we can keep our schedule and get the feature out the door. And so it's the testing that ends up suffering. So the benefit is move this up front, you give it the focus it needs, and if we need another day to write the test, well, we'll take another day to write the test, and then we're not in the place where we have to make those tough choices about having code that's ready to be shipped, but might not have enough time to test it fully, and do we push out the release and things like that. Baking in automation from day one, so I know a lot of people here, I mean, you get in a point with legacy software where you dug yourself into your own grave sort of with, you know, automation coverage, and you didn't build it when you built the application, and now you're at the point of, well, how am I going to go back and write automation coverage for this huge application, right? How am I going to find the time to do that? So this is great in that it is a process that bakes in automation, good automation coverage up front if you do it right. It will help you build more testable software. So a lot of these Cucumber and other behavior-driven development frameworks, they rely on more of the API level and services testing. And so this will drive people to build software that automation tools can hook into more easily, build new APIs, new capabilities in their tools to be able to do that. And then finally, it allows you to push software to your customers when you're ready. So instead of having to plan around these big releases, a lot of people would pair something like test-driven development or behavior-driven development with continuous integration, continuous deployment, so that they can write a test up front, write the code against that test, and then push the code right when that feature is ready and not have to wait to test a huge release. So allows you to get value to your customers more quickly, and in Agile, that's huge. It's all about getting usable software out in front of your customers as soon as you can, getting feedback, and then iterating on that. So we'll talk through these in a little bit more detail, but first here you see that, you know, we have the typical timeline, right? And when testing is on the end of the process, what can happen is, well, it took the BA longer than expected to write the requirements, or the developer did a poor estimate and they took twice as long to write the code. And so then what we end up with a lot of times is, well, you know, our release date is day 21 of the sprint and the end of the third week, and we are left with one day maybe to do testing, right? So then we rush to do all of this testing at the end of the cycle, and we might not get to test everything thoroughly. So then we end up sending out potentially poor quality software, or we end up having to push the release date. And so it's this constant negotiation of, are we going to ship or not? Have we tested this enough? And so, you know, TDD is one of those things where by flipping the process like Adam showed, you put the testing effort up front, and it really removes that temptation and removes a lot of that conflict in organizations. And we obviously know the earlier that you do testing, the better it is, because defects, once they get out into production, are really, really expensive to fix. And so, you know, if you catch defects up front, they're a lot less costly. I think we've all seen this graph a number of times, but it's something like 100 times more expensive if you find a defect out in production than if you find it in a testing cycle, right? So by doing test-driven development, you're doing the testing as early as you can. You're actually writing tests before you even have code. So ultimately, it should save you a lot of cost in fixing these defects that you find as a result of that testing. In terms of building automation coverage up front, you know, the whole TDD process, it doesn't have to be built around automated testing, and Adam will talk about that. There's a lot of things you can do with actually doing BDD and using manual testing. So we shouldn't think of BDD as solely automation, but a lot of times it is paired with automation, and it is paired with things like CI. And so what it does really is it forces you in a lot of ways to not focus on regression type of automation testing that you build after features are ready, and typically UI testing that, you know, can be very brittle and difficult to maintain, and instead focus on things like integration type of testing, unit testing, testing out more of the services layer. And so that's a lot more robust type of test coverage that will cost a lot less to maintain in the long run. And the nice thing too is a lot of these tools are open source, so it's, from a licensing perspective, pretty nice that you can get a lot of good free tools that will build this, you know, help you to build this automation coverage as well. So Adam's really the expert on this, and or more of the expert, I would say, than me on this. But I have learned a lot from him on this. And so one of the nice things about BDD and TDD is that you end up actually changing your code based on the way that you're doing your testing. So a lot of times you'll push your code to become more of discrete units. So you kind of uncouple a lot of parts of your code, because what you're trying to do is build a pipeline where you have features that are independent of each other, so that when you test one particular feature, you feel confident in pushing that particular feature out and not impacting a ton of other things in your application. And one of the ways that people then get around doing the testing is, well, if Adam goes and changes feature A and that interacts with feature B and C and D that all might be getting worked on by other developers at that time, they'll actually create things called mock objects, which basically would replicate what those features might do and allow you to basically get a sense of doing integration testing while not having to actually wait for those developers to finish those particular features. And so those can be things that you hear people talk about, like mock objects, and stubs and things like that, but they get to be really important parts of your application. So the key takeaway is that a lot of this stuff, it takes a village, and you can't just be a tester and go implement BDD. You're going to have to get the developers to build a lot of this stuff for you to help you actually be able to write tests in this way. And so I think a lot of people have seen this as well. This is kind of maybe one of the most played out diagrams in the game, so I apologize for that. But we do see this as a real-world problem. I mean, a lot of companies focus almost all of their automation effort on UI tests, and those are very brittle, difficult to maintain tests. They're usually using commercial automation tools that can be quite expensive, from companies like HP and SmartBear and others that provide those type of UI testing tools. And so we see a lot of focus in flipping that and focusing more on the unit tests and integration tests. And integration tests would be basically what would be accomplished by BDD or ATDD, is sort of using the services layer to actually interact with the application, so you don't have to wait on or trust the UI to load in the right way to run that test. And so this is what I was trying to get across in the point of decoupling your features and allowing you to push when you're ready. So in the old way, you see here that we have 3 different features here, and so we might finish feature A in a day, and then feature B takes longer, and then we're waiting for the developer that was working on feature A to now start coding feature C, and we have a lot of waiting time where we have these features stacked up, they're ready to go, but we've got to build them all into one release of the application, test that, and then deploy it out into production. So we really have to wait a long time before our customers see value from features that are already completed. So if we write all those tests up front, the testing work is basically done. Especially if they're automated tests, a lot of the testing effort will be done up front. So then if we're pairing something like TDD with continuous integration, continuous deployment, what happens is we can write feature A, code it, and we already have the test there. So then we just run the automated tests through our CI process. We validate whether or not that particular feature is good, and then deploy that out into production. And so I'm trying not to blur the lines here, but a lot of times, and especially in the Better Cloud case, you will be pairing BDD with CI and CD, and the two are really best realized when you have them working together. And so when you finally put in this end-to-end pipeline, it allows you really to drive a lot more value back to the business. So I did mention that we've done a survey on this, and I really wanted to show the survey to let everyone in here who's not doing TDD feel like they're not like 100 years behind the curve. You'll see in the results of this survey, really, if you're doing BDD, like Adam is, that's great, or ATDD, that's really great, and you're kind of one of the early adopters. But this is something that we see becoming more and more of the trend over the next couple of years, which is why we're investing in tools specifically in this space. So this was one of the first questions that we asked in the survey. Again, we had about 200 people respond to this, and we asked them, how long ago did you implement a BDD or ATDD or TDD approach? And you'll see that big pink pie slice there is that they haven't even started yet, but they're hoping to soon. So that's almost 50% of the people have not even experimented with this at all. And then you'll see, the rest of the pie is basically taken up with mostly people who have implemented just in the last year. So you see a very small percentage of people who have been doing this for a number of years. So this is really kind of a thing that's right in process right now. So you're learning about this really right at the peak time to be getting involved and starting to investigate this. Another thing that we saw here, which is just to really, I think, give us a pat on the back about this conference and the fact that we're talking about stuff like this, is that there's not a lot of good content out about this. This is typically something that people are reading about online. That lighter purple slice there is showing you that almost half of the people found out about this just online through online communities, and there's a very small amount of trade show presence around this. So this is as well to tell you guys, there's a lot of stuff that's going on online. We have our blog, but there are a number of others out there. There's people on Twitter, people everywhere online that you can connect with, and we'd be happy to help you out on these types of things. And so you shouldn't just focus on trade shows or just focus on webinars. Make sure that you're getting out there and following a lot of these more cutting-edge thought leaders out on the internet. And then this one I thought was really interesting. So again, I don't know how many people here brought developers to the show, but consistently we're seeing a theme in Agile, and specifically definitely in TDD and BDD, around quality being a kind of cross-team initiative. And the biggest stumbling block that people that implemented TDD found was trying to get developers to write tests. So that's a big mind shift change. It's also a skill set change. A lot of developers have never thought about and never really written a test before. So it will take time, and that's a thing that you have to be aware of, is that developers are always wanting to build the next feature, and they're not always so enthused about writing the next test. So it's something that we kind of need to work on in terms of getting this type of process implemented. And this is just showing some stats on what people are coming off of when moving to more of a TDD or BDD approach. You'll see that there's very few people, that's more that sort of light purple slice there, that are going directly from a waterfall process to trying to do more TDD type development. Really the majority of people are coming off some requirements-driven approach that's still more of a Scrum or a Kanban type of process. And I want to clarify on that too, to say that TDD and BDD is kind of a development style, but it's not necessarily an Agile planning style. So you can be Scrum and Kanban and be still test-driven. And that's something that Adam will talk about as we segue here and talk a little bit more about how Better Cloud specifically is doing this inside their organization. So I'll hand it back over to Adam.
Thanks, Kevin. So yeah, a bit of a disclaimer here is we do practice what we preach. When I started Better Cloud, and when one of my partners, Kevin Skibbia, started as well, we were very loosely Agile Scrum. We created user stories. Typically it was the product team would take user stories and they would hand them off to the developers. Developers would work on them, and the testers would test the new functionality, and then we would release. But really the main goal was just get it out as fast as possible. So eventually that will bite you in the end. So we took a very hard look at what was going on. Why did we have defects make it into production? Why were customers coming back to us and saying, hey, the feature looks awesome, but I can't get it to work? So we took a look to figure out what is a better way to increase the quality of the product and allow the teams to work a bit better together. And that really was a blend of ATDD and BDD. So for us, what a typical sprint looks like for us, so we do 2 or 3 week sprints, and you'll see here that there is a lot of sprint planning for the next sprint while we're working on the current sprint. To me, this is really key to getting this right, because if you don't do proper planning up front, then your sprint that you're going to have this coming up is not going to be successful. If you don't take the time to get the product team and the devs and the QAs, which includes both manual and automated testers, working together to create the acceptance criteria, to create the user stories, to give feedback on those, your sprint is not going to be successful. You're going to have a lot of difficulties. One thing I have seen some teams do is essentially they'll put a 2-day buffer into their sprints. So they'll take the first 2 days of the sprint and do all of their planning there. totally fine, not a problem at all. Just one thing that you want to get away from is doing the actual planning of the sprint while you're in the sprint. That's when you can get into some difficulties. That messes with estimates. It'll definitely blow your deadline out of the water. So making sure that sprint planning is a major part of this is absolutely crucial. So for us, what does the process really look like for us? So in terms of our tools, so we use Jira and Qtest primarily for our ticket tracking and our test case management. So we'll have the user stories. We created a custom field in Jira for our acceptance criteria. I know there's tools that can do it for you. There's other integrations that you can have, but for us, it was just simply easier to just create a custom field, put our acceptance criteria in there. The devs love it, QA loves it, and it's easy for us. And then what we'll do is we'll tie the individual testing tasks back to the user stories and those acceptance criteria, run those in Qtest, update the Jira ticket, and move on our way. One of the cool things that we found with you starting to use BDD was there's actually a lot of really nifty automation tools that will allow you to leverage your given, when, then format acceptance tests. So what we found is we use Groovy with Spock framework. I know that you can use, there's Gherkin and a couple of other neat automation tools to use, or automation languages to use as well. But the cool thing here is our automation team, when we joined, they were running always a sprint behind. So devs and manual testers would do their work, they'd release it, and then the automation team would start working on their work. But what we found is when we started using Spock, is that the automation team could script out their given, when, thens during sprint planning. They could go ahead and write them out. And so that way they knew during sprint planning what they were going to be working on, and they could really hit the ground running on day one of the next sprint. So hopefully you guys can see this. I know it's a little bit dark on the screen, but this is a real example of one of our tests that we run using Spock. And again here, it's in a very plain, easy to read format. So our manual testers can come in and take a look at it. Even the product team could come in and take a look, or the BAs could come and take a look at the test and say, yeah, okay, well, this is exactly what I need. When the user does this action, then this is what they're going to see. Yes, this makes total sense to me. Check mark, this is definitely covered. So highly recommend looking into marrying your automation tools as much as possible with your BDD. I think you're going to find some really good improvements there. All right, so what have we seen since we've implemented this? It's been about 1.5 years at Better Cloud since we have implemented ATDD and BDD. One of the really cool things, and it's always a goal for me wherever I go and work, is to have the QA team become the SMEs for the product. They're in it every day, they test it, they know it probably better even than the support teams or the product teams. So people are now coming to the QA team to ask them questions about the product. Hey, how does this work? If we make this change, what effect is that going to have? The acceptance test cases, they now get created during sprint planning time, which we found it frees up QA's time to focus more time testing in the sprint and to create more complex test scenarios. One of the additional things that we found with this is now the team has time to do exploratory testing. Before, that was completely out the door. They had absolutely no time to do it. They were writing their tests and getting their work done, and now we're finding that when we give them that creative freedom, they're finding the harder to find bugs. They're finding better scenarios. They're finding even product improvements to take back to the product team of, hey, when we did this, we got this error message, and it looks a little bit funny, not really a bug, but have you thought about doing it this way? And now QA and dev, we can also split the testing between the unit integration and acceptance testing, which also is absolutely huge for us, because before it was always up to QA to do all of the testing for everything, the simplest small piece to the more complex testing scenarios. And now that we're using TDD along with BDD and ATDD, is with the devs writing their unit tests, with the devs writing their integration tests, it frees us up again to focus on more complex scenarios. And now when we do our builds in Jenkins, those tests run automatically. So if we know something core is broken, it automatically fails the build, kicks it over to the dev, and it doesn't have any impact on the QA team at all. A couple of tips, some things that we found as we've implemented this, some things. When we initially implemented the new methodology for our team is we didn't include the test automation team, because we figured, okay, well, they can just meet with the the manual testers, after sprint planning, they can get the information they need and they can get going. What we found was this kept putting them behind the curve. Also, what we found was typically our test automation folks, I mean, they're essentially developers, right? They're developers working on a QA team. So they're able to provide more complex technical solutions to our testing scenarios. So when we started bringing them in, they were able to bring that knowledge, that development type knowledge on the QA team into the sprint planning to allow us to have better acceptance tests. Also, another thing is, this is just kind of general for test automation, definitely important with as fast as we move in the Agile world, is don't think inside your tool what test automation is. We set some time aside for each one of our automation folks to go out and try new things, to figure out new efficiencies, and we've been able to find some cool things where we created a Chrome extension tool that when Better Cloud had a big product rebranding, so we were looking at all of the hundreds of pages in our site that we were going to have to go through and look at the way that we changed our name. We capitalized the letter C, so we're going to have to go through our entire product, everywhere that said Better Cloud, and try to figure out, make sure it was capitalized. But one of our guys created a Chrome extension tool that essentially did it for us. It shaved days of testing time to about 3 or 4 hours, which was the time that it took him to actually write the tool and then run it. So definitely lean on your guys to really think outside the tool. Break that of, we have to have our testers test with the tools that they have, and that's the only way that they can do it. I harped on this earlier. This is always big. You'll always hear me talking about this. Focus on communication and collaboration. Absolutely key for any successful Agile team, really any successful team, whether you're waterfall or Agile, but especially important. And really, we do believe that BDD can help bridge that gap by bringing the testers up front to increase that communication. And then, both manual and automated testers working together is key. I've been doing QA now since about '97, and every year I hear that automation is going to kick manual testers out, and there's not going to be any more manual testers, and our jobs are all going to be gone. I've yet to see that happen. I don't think that is truly going to happen. So, I think that some organizations can make a mistake by separating those two organizations, right? So having your manual testers and your automation testers working together is absolutely imperative. And that's it for questions.
Awesome.
All right, guys. We had some good questions from the audience. Usually writing API tests ahead of time is much easier than writing UI tests. Have you had successful experience using TDD with a lot of UI tests?
A lot of UI tests?
Yeah.
Yep. Typically, for our UI tests, most of our stuff we try to focus on under the UI. Since the UI tests are very brittle, we have our automation guys have been moving away from that. So typically our TDD tests don't focus on the UI itself.
And I think it's interesting, too, if you get some time to talk to Adam, to talk to them about they've undergone a shift towards more of a microservices architecture, which really allows you to do more testing through the APIs. It also allows you to separate out a lot of the components so that you can test them more easily individually. So that's a big component, I think, of being successful.
Yeah, so typically for our UI test, what we'll do is we'll just create a mock. So we'll have the UI sitting on top of a mock. So we'll kick off whatever, if we're trying to submit a brand new user to be added to the database or whatever, then we'll submit that over to the mock. It'll kick back some information, and we'll display, whether we want it to be an error message or whatever it might be for the UI. So that's how we do most of our UI testing, is through some sort of mocked underlayer.
Great. Next question. Do you think having dedicated automation engineers is a good idea? In our experience, they sometimes become somewhat distant from the product, do not fully understand features that need to be that they need to automate. Any recommendations on how to deal with this issue?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, and that's something that we had actually touched on here, that we had run into when we first implemented TDD and ATDD, is that the automation folks are just like, hey, just tell us what we need to test, and we'll go write the test for it. So really, I think it's going to be bringing them up front in the sprint planning and really sitting down with them and maybe even having a conversation with them about what their job truly is. So I view test automation folks, I touched on this earlier, as they bring the ability to deliver complex testing scenarios to your testing team. So if you can talk to them, you talk to them about that. So your job is not to automate XYZ or to make the manual tester's life easy. It is literally to allow us to do more complex scenarios. So our guys are creating mocks, they're creating REST endpoints, they're creating Chrome extension tools, PowerShell scripts. So some of it may be is that they don't feel perhaps that they're living up to their potential or that they're less than a developer. That's something that we have actually run into where our automation guys are like, hey, I want to be a developer, so I want to stop doing test automation and move to development. It's like, well, you are a developer. You're a developer in test. So that's one thing I would say, have a conversation with them, sit down, see if they truly understand what business value they bring to the organization. And they may feel like they're either being constrained within the tool, they may feel like they don't have the ability to truly express themselves, or they may just say, yeah, I truly don't know what business value I bring. Maybe the UI shifts a lot, so all my tests are always broken. So I feel that when I come in and during the day, all I do is edit my broken test. Well, that can definitely cause a negative impact on the way that they do their job. And so, talk to them about mocking the underneath layer, or shifting them away from the UI type testing. So I would just have a pretty frank conversation with them, to be honest.
And I think as well, I mean, you guys work in Scrum, but a lot of teams that we've seen been successful where they have automation engineers that are kind of not responding to the team and integrated with the team. They go with sort of the three amigos approach. Absolutely. Where they'll build these units to start, and they might just not even really have teams, but they just have a unit of one automation engineer, one BA, and then one developer. And they'll put them together and have them work as a unit to define these given when then tests, and then actually go out and automate them and build code against them. So that could be a good way as well to kind of build a team structure up front that would require more collaboration and kind of force the issue if you want to go down that route.
Exactly.
Okay, next question. Who do you think should be responsible for updating automated tests when a new feature breaks? Dev or QA?
Oh, that's a loaded question. So it depends. It depends on the automated test. Is it if it's an automated test that it's a unit test that the devs have written as part of TDD, then it is the devs' responsibility to update that test. We have what we have just coined the ownership module of if you write it, you own it. So if the devs write some code, it goes to production and it breaks, well, it's up to them and them alone to make the fix. If the same thing happens with a test, whether it's a set, or we even have some of our manual guys writing scripts to help us out. If it breaks, well, you're the owner, you wrote it, so you need to fix it.
I would agree.
As you stated, the transition to TDD, BDD requires not only buy-in, but assistance and support from the dev group. What suggestions do you have for onboarding developers to help in the writing of tooling or mock services to facilitate TDD and BDD?
So for us, is we've had to find a couple of folks in the organization and essentially turn them into evangelists. So they are the ones who go out and they help train the other developers. They're very passionate about testing. For us, we're lucky that it's our CTO. So every new hire that comes in, he goes through a 3-day class to teach them about TDD. So for you guys, if you guys don't have the buy-in from the leadership, is maybe you yourself can become that evangelist, or you can talk to a few other folks who are passionate about it. Get together, talk about ways that you can learn, and then go out and teach other folks in the organization about it.
Great. Well, that's it. Let's give it up for Adam and Kevin, our closers for the night.
Thank you.